11 people dead in a single calculated act of fire. That's the chilling core fact where we begin today in Chicago, February 15th, 1994.
Yeah.
This incident was immediately classed by investigators as one of the deadliest cases of gang-related violence the city saw in that entire decade, a terrifying flashpoint on the South Side.
And we have to say that official number 11 is tragically conservative. The sources confirm that among those victims was Keisha Wallace, an 18-year-old girl.
Right.
And she was 3 months pregnant. So if you really count the lost potential, this single act of horror eliminated 12 lives.
It's an immense tragedy, and the data mass murder, aggravated arson, I mean, that's horrifying enough.
Of course.
But here's the piece of the source material that, for me, elevates this case from a horrifying crime to a profound psychological study. The shocking catalyst.
The motive.
Exactly. This wasn't a hit ordered by the big corporate gangs. It wasn't about seizing a major drug corridor or some huge retaliation for a preceding massacre. The motive, laid out in the police interviews, was fundamentally simple.
A stolen brown leather jacket.
A stolen brown leather jacket. It's unbelievable.
It is, and it was a simple, almost juvenile act of disrespect and theft that happened during a casual dice game 2 weeks prior.
2 weeks.
The documents make it abundantly clear that the two perpetrators, who were brothers, Marcus and Terrell Johnson, who lived just 3 blocks from the scene, they felt this act of ridicule, this violation, demanded a debt.
And that debt, in their specific worldview, could only be settled with premeditated mass murder.
Yes.
So our mission today is to dive deep into this stack of evidence, the detailed surveillance logs, the victim profiles, the trial transcripts, and the raw testimony, to fully understand how a simple piece of clothing, an old coat, became the catalyst for absolute catastrophe.
And we'll be examining the context of 1994 Chicago, where survival hinged on adherence to a rigid, often unspoken code of honor.
And how the obligation to uphold that code utterly demanded that a debt be paid in fire, destroying not just the lives of the victims, but the future of the perpetrators as well.
And I think we really need to spend time analyzing the deep psychological and sociological pressures at play here. We'll explore the environment that turned 2 young men into calculators of vengeance, moving with this icy precision to restore an honor they believed was lost.
And what the lasting scars of that single Valentine's Day night tell us about the persistence of economic despair and, a fractured community in America's forgotten neighborhoods. To begin to understand the lethal calculation and the cold fury that drove Marcus Johnson, we have to start by reconstructing the world that forged him.
We have to.
We were talking about West Englewood on Chicago's South Side, an area the source material starkly describes as an open wound that never quite healed.
And it's so vital we don't just categorize this as a bad neighborhood. That's too simple. This was a community under intense compounding systemic stress.
Right.
It was roughly 2 square miles, home to nearly 40,000 residents, predominantly African-American, who were just struggling against institutional abandonment and overwhelming economic hardship.
The geography itself tells the story, doesn't it? Bounded by these major arteries like Garfield Boulevard, Racine Avenue, and Ashland Avenue.
Yeah, and the old commercial infrastructure, the small businesses that once anchored the community, they stood, in the words of one observer, like tombstones, marking the death of better times.
Wow. And we can't overlook the physical context of the season. This happened in the heart of a Chicago winter. That brutal cold in February 1994 is essential to the psychology of being trapped.
Absolutely. The temperatures were consistently in the low 20s during the day, and then they just plummet to single digits at night.
And that's before wind chill.
Exactly. The sources describe the quality of that cold, how the wind, whipping off Lake Michigan, carried this bone-deep ache. It forced people indoors into often dilapidated, inefficient housing.
So this forced proximity, this reliance on poorly maintained, even abandoned structures, it just magnified the tension.
100%. It was a landscape of physical decay paired with this constant, exhausting effort just to stay warm and survive.
But the physical struggle was overshadowed by a massive, ongoing sociological earthquake. In the early 90s, the city began the forced, large-scale displacement of thousands of residents. This was due to the demolition of the huge public housing projects.
Yes, this is the crucial turning point for the context of this violence. We're talking about the systematic tearing down of places like Rupert Taylor Homes and Cabrini Green.
Under the guise of urban renewal.
Right. And the intention, it might have been reform, but the reality for the thousands of families was sudden, forced movement into receiving neighborhoods like West Englewood.
And they brought everything with them.
Everything. Deep-seated gang affiliations, old grudges, and the territorial claims that now had to be fought over entirely new corners and blocks. It just injected immediate, unfiltered chaos into already fragile communities.
So if you scatter thousands of families and you disrupt these decades-old social contracts, what happens to the established power on the street? Do the old, massive gang structures adapt to that?
They shattered. The sources analyze this shift profoundly. Throughout the 1980s, you had these corporate-style gangs, the gangster disciples, the vice lords, the black disciples.
Right, with a real hierarchy.
A real hierarchy, internal rules, leadership, often dictated from prison. But when the neighborhood was flooded with desperate, competing individuals, that structure dissolved. It fragmented into dozens of smaller, highly localized crews fighting for specific blocks, corners, or even specific abandoned buildings.
Like the one targeted in this fire.
Exactly. The central authority was just gone.
So if the corporate structure, that institutionalized rule set, dissolved, what replaced it as the most important governing principle for survival?
The sources highlight this critical and tragic shift from what's called instrumental violence to expressive violence.
Okay, so break that down for us. What's the difference?
Instrumental violence is, well, it's rational. You commit it for a tangible, practical goal, money, drug territory, specific resources.
A means to an end.
A means to an end. But when those large-scale economic opportunities evaporate, the violence stops being about profit and becomes entirely about perception. The objective shifts to respect, to reputation, and most critically, about aggressively communicating that you are not soft.
But why does respect become the primary, most valuable currency? I mean, Marcus, for example, he has a stable job, right? Doesn't that economic leverage offer him some protection?
That's a brilliant question, and it really hits the core contradiction. Marcus does have a job, a mechanic at Big Mike's. But in an environment where systemic instability is the norm, where job security is tenuous, where institutional support is non-existent,
money loses its power.
It does. If you're earning $9 an hour under the table, you are still one paycheck or one argument away from destitution. Respect, however, offers immediate, localized protection.
Okay, I see.
If you are known as someone who will respond violently to disrespect, you avoid challenges. You are seen as dangerous, and therefore, you are safer.
So the logic becomes, if the only thing you truly own is your reputation, and someone publicly challenges that, they are attempting to take away your only asset, your only shield.
Precisely. And the sources confirm this was the rigid, internalized logic of the time. If you show weakness, if you allow disrespect to go unchallenged, you invite further challenges. You become an easy mark.
And that's the tragedy.
The tragedy of the Johnson brothers is that they lived in an environment where honor was the only currency they felt they couldn't afford to lose because everything else, their neighborhood, their economic future, their parents, had already been taken away by forces far beyond their control.
So this shift to expressive violence is what allowed the theft of an old coat to trigger a mass murder.
The coat wasn't just leather. It was the symbol of everything they were fighting to protect.
Let's focus now on the men who executed this chilling plan, starting with Marcus Anthony Johnson. He was 27 that February. The sources paint a picture of a man who was quietly carrying the weight of his world.
He was a formidable figure, physically. 6'2", lean, with this distinctive scar across his left eyebrow.
From a fight when he was a kid, right?
Yeah, a juvenile fight at 16, which the police reports note gave him this permanent, calculating look of skepticism. And his routine was almost ritualistic in its attempt to impose order on chaos.
Right, the 6:15 a.m. wake-up, the instant coffee.
Always Maxwell House, never the cheapest store brand. 2 Newports, and then the slow walk to Big Mike's auto repair.
He was a skilled worker, a mechanic who spent his days under the hood of broken-down cars. He was paid $9 an hour under the table by Big Mike Torelli, who had stayed put on Ashland despite the decay.
And that's a key point. Marcus wasn't involved in the street economy of drugs or guns. He was trying to work his way out, but his history, it prevented him from escaping the emotional pull of the street.
His life was fundamentally defined by successive losses. His mother died of breast cancer in 1989.
But the central trauma, the foundational experience that carved his character, was the death of his father, James Anthony Johnson. James was killed by random crossfire in August of '87. Marcus was only 20 years old, and the sources detail this horrific fact. Marcus watched his father bleed out on the hot summer pavement at 69th and Holstead.
Well, people just stood around.
Agonizingly, bystanders just stood around. Some were calling for help, but others, crucially, were standing back, some even photographing the scene as if it were a spectacle.
That experience of watching his father die, of being rendered totally helpless, that must have been the seed for the extreme rigidity of his personal code.
It was the origin point of the code. His father's lessons, which Marcus clung to as a final directive, became the rulebook for his survival. The tenets were absolute.
Never let anyone make you look weak.
Never back down from disrespect.
Never forget where you came from.
And the one that ultimately demanded 11 lives? Never let someone take what's yours without consequences.
And the physical relic that embodied this code, the only thing he had left from his father, was the jacket.
That brown leather jacket wasn't just clothing. It was from his father's time in the final years of the Korean War. It was old, the leather was cracked and worn, the lining threadbare, but it was the absolute tangible symbol of his father's honor and his legacy.
So by 1994, Marcus was, as the sources describe him, just tired.
Tired of the decay, tired of the perpetual effort, tired of losing friends to bullets or prison. But he remained absolutely determined to survive and uphold that code, believing it was the one thing that separated him from the chaos.
Let's look at his younger brother, Terrell James Johnson. He was the emotional counterpoint to Marcus's calculation.
Absolutely. Terrell was 23, stocky, powerful, and very reactive. He dropped out in 11th grade and faced immediate rejection from the Army due to a juvenile record for aggravated assault.
He had a girlfriend, Shanice, who held a small job at a grocery store, and they had these vague future dreams of leaving West Englewood.
Vague is the right word, but Terrell's defining characteristic was his absolute, unquestioning loyalty to Marcus.
That loyalty superseded everything else. His own instinct for self-preservation, even his desire for a future with Shanice.
Exactly. Marcus had raised him after their father's death, providing the structure and protection Terrell craved. So in Terrell's mind, when you disrespected Marcus, you had effectively spit in his own face.
The code was a shared burden.
An identity they had forged together in loss. This dynamic is critical. Marcus made the calculation. Terrell provided the blind enforcement.
Now let's turn to the Ashland crew, the victims. The source material is crucial here because it shows that these were not arch enemies or major gang leaders.
Not at all.
They were young people living marginal lives.
They were. Raymond Thomas, Ray, 22, was the unofficial leader. He was charismatic but drifting. A former Inglewood High basketball player who had failed to capitalize on his talent.
Not a kingpin, the arrests were minor.
Minor. Marijuana possession, petty retail theft. He lived at home with his mother.
And his girlfriend, Keisha Wallace, 18, who was 3 months pregnant. The police reports, through victim interviews, mentioned they were actively discussing names.
Raymond Jr. or Destiny?
That single, intimate detail just underscores that the fire took 11 individual lives, plus an entire future in the unborn child.
Then there's Antoine Mercer, Ray's 24-year-old cousin.
Mm.
And Antoine represents this heartbreaking cycle of dashed potential.
Right.
He had actually completed 2 years of community college, studying business management, before the money ran out, and he was forced to return home, unable to secure the final funding to finish his degree.
And Jerome Little, 21. The source material specifies that he had a job interview scheduled for the city sanitation department.
On the morning of February 15th at 9:00,
A steady job, city benefits, a real way out, an appointment he would tragically never make.
Landa Price, 20, was another victim actively seeking distance. She was 3 weeks from finishing a nursing assistant program. She was on the cusp of legitimate financial independence, trying to build a career that served others.
And Darnell Hayes, 19, who was just 3 months shy of high school graduation, spending his free time writing rap lyrics, dreaming of a music career.
Darnell Hayes being the sole survivor, and therefore the key witness.
But the overarching reflection from the sources is just devastating. These were mostly kids, not hardened criminals. They were simply trapped in a place and time that offered limited options and unlimited ways to fail.
Yeah. They gathered together in that abandoned building for a mixture of safety, camaraderie, and just a lack of any other viable place to go.
The stakes in this tragedy are purely the destruction of human potential. We move now to the incident that set this entire chain of violence into motion. A frigid Friday night, January 28, 1994, the temperature dropping to a brutal 8 degrees Fahrenheit.
And the setting is so critical. The cold, dark, unlit basement of 6743 South Ashland Avenue, illegally rigged with power, the crew's unofficial headquarters.
8 crew members, including Ray, were playing craps. Marcus and Terrell had been invited over. Marcus was present, but in the background observing, wearing his father's coat.
And the atmosphere shifted around 1:05 in the morning. Marcus was winning up about $60, which, as we established, was a meaningful amount of money in that environment.
Absolutely.
Ray was drunk, losing badly, and he was looking to assert dominance to cover his financial loss.
This is the flashpoint of expressive violence.
It is. Marcus was accused of cheating. Ray, fueled by liquor and the need to perform for his audience, ignored the accusation of cheating and went for the deepest point of vulnerability.
He mocked the jacket.
Laughed, called Marcus too serious, and then mocked the jacket, specifically bringing up Marcus wearing his dead daddy's coat like some kind of shrine. It was a public and profound psychological assault, attacking the very source of Marcus's honor and identity.
And when Marcus stood up to leave, attempting to remove himself from the confrontation, which was a surprisingly calm, nonviolent move,
Yeah.
Ray escalated it.
From verbal disrespect to physical Violation.
Yeah.
Ray grabs the jacket, physically pulling the old leather off Marcus's shoulders, holding it up like a trophy, claiming it was payment for the disrespect Marcus had shown him by being too serious and winning money.
This was a public shaming.
100%. It was an attempt to strip Marcus of his symbolic protection in front of his crew.
Terrell was ready to fight right then, to pull a knife, but Marcus stopped him. Instead, he exhibited what the sources described as this unnerving, absolute stillness.
Yeah, he just looked at Ray, offered no words, and walked out into the 8-degree night without his jacket. The silence, according to later testimony, was more terrifying than any threat.
3 blocks away, Terrell catches up, demanding they go back and take the jacket by force. That's when Marcus delivered the chilling pledge that cemented his commitment to vengeance.
He told Terrell, "Not tonight, but we're getting it back, and they're going to learn what it costs to take what ain't theirs."
The crew back in the basement likely thought this was a temporary victory, a punchline that would fade with the hangover.
They saw leather and thread.
Marcus saw the ultimate, uncompensated violation of his family's code and his personal honor.
And that's the central paradox. The theft set a 17-day countdown to mass murder. Ray's action was expressive violence, an assertion of dominance.
Right.
Marcus's response, however, moved beyond expressive violence into calculated, premeditated terminal retribution. He was no longer trying to gain respect. He was trying to liquidate the account of disrespect entirely. The calculation had begun.
The 2 weeks between the theft and the execution of the fire are crucial because they completely negate any argument of a sudden crime of passion.
Oh, completely.
The sources detail a meticulous planning process. Marcus continued working at Big Mike's auto repair, but he was carrying this tremendous internal weight of violence.
He maintained his physical routine, changing oil and fixing transmissions. But his concentration was elsewhere. Mike Torelli, his boss, noticed the profound internal change. Around February 3rd, Mike found Marcus staring blankly at an engine block and offered a pointed warning. He said, "Whatever you're thinking about doing, Marcus, think twice, then think a third time. Prison ain't worth it."
And Marcus's response, or his lack of one, is telling. He just nodded and went back to work.
He viewed the debt as something deeper than thought, deeper than any external consequence like prison. The code his father instilled had become an imperative that overshadowed everything else, including his future and his job.
This internal struggle surfaces most vividly on Sunday, February 6th, when Marcus visited his grandmother, Dorothy Johnson, after taking her to church.
Greater Mount Zion Baptist Church. The setting itself is such a contrast. Her kitchen, smelling of collard greens and cornbread, representing warmth, stability, and legitimate moral authority.
And Dorothy, being the foundation of his upbringing, she recognized the dangerous shift in him.
She did. She saw the same hard streak that she feared had led to her son Marcus's father being killed years earlier, and she asked him directly to consider if the unknown offense was worth losing everything you have worked for.
She was offering him a lifeline, a chance to choose a future built on work and stability over a past built on vengeance.
But Marcus chose silence. He dismissed the wisdom of his elder, the voice of sanity, by saying, "I love you, Grandma," and walked away.
He chose the code's demand for absolute justice over the pain of his grandmother. This moment is where the calculation shifts from abstract planning to moral certainty.
Starting the very next day, February 7th, Marcus began his surveillance, moving through West Englewood like, as the source describes, a ghost.
This wasn't guesswork. It was a military-style assessment of the target.
He spent a full week establishing pattern and weakness. He determined the crew gathered most nights, usually arriving between 10:30 and 11:00 a.m., and generally staying until 2 or 3 in the morning.
He noted the variance in attendance, 6 to 9 people, but the consistent timing was enough for his plan.
Exactly.
And his architectural assessment of the building, 6743 South Ashland, is what truly defines the premeditation. He wasn't just planning to burn a building, he was planning to build a tomb.
That's it, exactly. It was a 3-story condemned structure with power illegally rigged up. He noted that the two main exits, the front door on Ashland and the back door to the alley, were outward opening.
A crucial detail.
So crucial. He realized that if those doors were chained and padlocked, the sheer force of people trying to escape from the inside would only reinforce the locks, unlike an inward opening door, which could sometimes be shouldered down.
He also assessed the windows, noting that while the ground floor was boarded up, the second and third floor windows were just empty frames, but internally protected by old, welded metal security grates.
He was systematically eliminating every viable escape route before he spent a dime on materials. The plan was not just ignition. The plan was containment and total annihilation.
He was calculating the inability of the victims to escape the fire long before he bought the accelerant.
Yeah.
The purchase of the tools of destruction confirms this cold-blooded logic. This happened on Saturday, February 12th, 3 miles from his neighborhood to avoid recognition.
And the sources detail the transactions meticulously. Hardware store number 1 yielded 3 heavy-duty chains, 6 feet long, usually used for securing construction equipment or industrial gates. $47 cash.
Hardware store number 2 in Bridgeport provided 4 high-quality brass padlocks with hardened steel shackles. $32 also cash. These are not cheap, easily broken locks.
Not at all. And then the key ingredient for mass murder, the accelerant.
At a gas station on Archer Avenue, he used cash to fill 5-gallon red plastic cans with gasoline.
25 gallons total. At 89 cents a gallon, this was an inexpensive yet devastatingly effective tool, all done in cash, creating no paper trail back to the Johnson home.
After acquiring the materials, he laid out a literal plan map. This is beyond typical street planning.
It's incredible. He marked the target building with a red X. He marked his escape routes. And he specifically marked the locations and estimated response times of emergency services.
He knew the police station was 6 blocks away, a 5 to 8 minute response.
And he knew Engine Company 61, the nearest fire station, was 7 blocks away. He was explicitly calculating the time required to achieve maximum destruction before the city could intervene. This level of forethought just shifts the context of the crime entirely.
While Marcus was focusing purely on execution, Terrell was wrestling with the morality of this decision, particularly under pressure from his girlfriend, Shanice, on February 9th.
Shanice confronted him. She recognized the shift in his behavior, saying he was acting like he was already in prison.
And Terrell tried to rationalize it.
He did. He said it was just about getting the jacket back. But Shanice cut right through the code with the voice of self-preservation. She told him he had a chance to move somewhere better, that this is the way you stay trapped here forever.
She was offering him a ticket out, a choice for a legitimate future.
And he rejected it, tragically. His internal commitment to Marcus, the only stable male influence left in his life, was paramount. His response was devastatingly simple. I can't let him do this alone. He's my brother.
That single phrase solidified his fate.
And the relationship with Shanice effectively broke that night. Terrell chose absolute familial loyalty and the rigidity of the code over his own survival and potential future.
And the man who set the dominoes falling, Ray. Did he have any internal struggle over holding on to that jacket?
Sources indicate a profound moment of doubt. Days before the fire, Ray was at his mother's home, the jacket hanging prominently in his room, and he realized taking it was stupid and childish.
He thought about giving it back.
He considered finding a way to return it anonymously to erase the offense without losing face.
But pride, that same lethal currency of the street, stopped him.
It did. He feared that returning it would make him look weak or soft in front of his crew. The need to maintain the image of dominance, fueled by the same expressive violence that led to the theft, sealed not only his own fate, but the fates of 10 others.
He chose pride over peace,
resulting in a horrific sacrifice.
This all culminated on Sunday night, February 13th, the eve of the attack, at Dorothy's kitchen table. The chains and the gasoline cans were loaded into the borrowed 1987 Buick Regal.
And Marcus offered Terrell one final, genuine out. He said, you should choose the future.
But Terrell was resolute.
Resolute, repeating his mantra, if you're doing this, I'm there. That's the only choice I got. It was a formal acceptance of shared fate and shared guilt.
And Marcus's final, clarifying motive. It wasn't about vengeance, not exactly. It was about exhaustion.
That phrase, which reappears in the source material, is incredibly potent. I'm tired. Tired of being quiet and calm and doing the right thing while everything falls apart anyway.
It's the voice of nihilism.
A belief that adherence to legitimate order had provided nothing but loss. Therefore, the only power left was the power to impose devastating consequence.
They kissed their sleeping grandmother goodbye and drove away.
Terrell noted the date. Valentine's Day was tomorrow.
The transition from that calm, warm kitchen to the methodical planning of a mass murder is truly the most chilling aspect of this entire process. They weren't monsters. They were men who calculated that the restoration of dignity was worth 12 lives. The hour of action arrived at 10:47 p.m., Monday, February 14th, 1994. The temperature hovered at 19 degrees. Marcus and Terrell parked a short distance from 6743 South Ashland.
Marcus described feeling a cold, empty clarity. He was functioning purely on calculation. The emotional part of his brain completely shut off.
And he articulated his final justification to Terrell one last time, cutting through any doubt.
It was never about the jacket. It's about them thinking they can disrespect us and walk away laughing. This confirms the objective was entirely the psychological restoration of honor.
Phase 1. Securing the exits. This happened between 10:58 p.m. and 11:11 p.m. This was the mechanism that turned the fire from property damage into murder.
They moved with chilling efficiency, wearing work gloves. Marcus secured the front door, coiling the 6-foot heavy-duty chain around the handle and a support beam, locking it with one of the brass padlocks.
Terrell mirrored the action at the back alley door.
Yes, despite his internal tremor, he did. The music and laughter from inside meant the victims were completely unaware they were being sealed in.
And the doors were secured to open no more than 2 inches.
Just enough for a sliver of smoke to escape, and for the victims to press their faces against the gap, but insufficient for escape.
Phase 2. Pouring the accelerant, 11:01 p.m. to 11:23 p.m. Retrieving the 25 gallons of gasoline.
Marcus was terrifyingly meticulous, demonstrating his mechanics focus. He poured slowly around the foundation, prioritizing the cracks where the fuel would seep down and reach the basement level where the majority of the crew was gathered.
Terrell was more erratic.
More erratic, yeah. Pouring faster, his panic starting to set in, but his loyalty overriding his fear. The smell of gasoline hung heavy and toxic in the cold air.
Let's pause for a moment on the devastating snapshot of the victims inside, just moments before the match struck.
Ray was losing at poker to Antoine, who was dealing. Jerome Little, focused on his future, was counting out his $43 for his job interview, transportation, and lunch.
Landa Price was trying to study.
For her nursing assistant finals, Darnell Hayes was scribbling rap lyrics, and Keisha Wallace, 3 months pregnant, was resting on an old mattress upstairs. 11 human beings, unaware they were sealed inside a fire trap.
Then came Phase 3, ignition, 11:27 p.m. Marcus struck the match. Did the plan momentarily crack?
The sources confirm a fleeting moment of humanity. Marcus held the tiny flame, watching it burn down toward his glove, silently questioning if this act was truly worth losing everything.
But the memory of Ray's laughter.
The public humiliation, the violation of the code, it overrode that doubt. He dropped the match.
And the gasoline ignited with a soft whoosh, which witnesses described as immediately escalating into a devouring roar within seconds, turning the cold night into a towering column of fire.
The horror unfolded instantly. At 11:28 p.m., the first desperate scream was heard.
Marcus and Terrell stood across the street, watching the building swell and darken.
The fire spread with unexpected velocity. Marcus could see the front door handle straining against the chains, and through that 2-inch gap he saw faces pressed against the opening, their eyes wide with terror.
And Terrell was instantly overwhelmed.
Whispering, "Oh, Jesus Christ, what did we do?"
Marcus, however, noted only an absolute void.
The desperate attempts to escape began immediately. The first fatality noted in the detailed timeline is just tragic beyond measure.
At 11:33 p.m., Keisha Wallace, the pregnant 18-year-old, jumped from a second-floor window. It was a 25-foot drop to the pavement.
The source notes the impact was a wet, heavy thud.
She was killed instantly by the fall, but the police report tragically concludes that she was luckier than the ones still inside, facing the imminent collapse.
Just 4 minutes later, at 11:37 p.m., the occupants on the 3rd floor realized the nature of their trap.
Antoine Mercer, the former college student, managed to force his upper body through a 3rd-floor window frame, screaming for help. This is the moment of recognition. Antoine made direct eye contact with Marcus across the street.
Realizing the arson was deliberate and calculated, he screamed, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to us?"
And Marcus remained silent.
Silent. Antoine was consumed by fire and smoke only 37 seconds later. The fire was moving with the speed of an accelerant poured directly into the structure's foundation.
And Darnell Hayes, the actual sole survivor, paid an unimaginable price for his escape at 11:43 p.m.
Darnell jumped from a second-floor window on the east side, attempting to escape the heat. He slipped from the narrow ledge, falling the full 20 feet and landing feet first on the unforgiving alley pavement.
The sources detail the sound compound fractures in both legs.
Described as a noise like branches snapping. He survived the fall and the fire, lying on the ground screaming, but he was condemned to a lifetime of chronic pain and reliance on a cane.
By 11:47 p.m., Ray, trapped in the suffocating heat of the basement with 7 others, had his final realization.
He realized Marcus was responsible for this calculated death trap. The black, poisonous smoke and descending heat forced him to confront the scale of the disrespect he had committed over a simple coat.
His final words.
Witnesses testified later that Ray's final words, moments before the end, were a quiet, desperate apology muttered to no one in particular, accepting that his pride had incurred this fatal debt.
The climax came at 11:52 p.m., marking the end for the majority of the victims.
Structural failure. The sustained, intense heat from the 25 gallons of gasoline had critically weakened the support beams. The third and second floors collapsed violently into the basement, crushing the 8 people trapped below under thousands of pounds of burning debris.
And the screaming stopped.
It stopped.
Sirens from Engine Company 61 finally arrived at 11:56 p.m., 4 minutes after the structural collapse. Marcus watched the flames shooting 50 feet high, still feeling that absolute void.
They drove away with careful deliberation. Marcus was quiet, calculating his next move. Terrell was shaking uncontrollably, crying, asking over and over, "What the hell did we do?"
All the rationalizations, the honor, the code, the respect, had dissolved into the reality of 11 lives erased.
And in that inferno, the father's jacket, the symbolic linchpin of the entire tragedy, burned into ash along with the victims.
The full scope of the disaster, what the city called the Valentine's Day fire, was confirmed the next morning. At 6:47 a.m. on February 15th, firefighter Michael O'Donnell was the first to enter the charred basement.
And O'Donnell was a 21-year veteran, but what he found was horrific. A mass grave of intermingled, charred human remains.
The destruction was so complete, he initially vomited onto the frozen sidewalk, unable to even estimate the number of dead.
This level of intentional devastation just broke seasoned first responders.
Detective Raymond Walsh arrived at 9:15 a.m. The initial assessment by fire investigator Susan Chen was immediate and certain. Definitely arson.
Accelerant was used, and both outward opening exits were chained and padlocked. This eliminated any doubt about intent. It was premeditated mass murder.
The investigation had a rapid breakthrough thanks to the one person who survived the inferno.
Darnell Hayes. In the morphine haze of Stroger Hospital, he regained consciousness just long enough to provide the crucial names, Marcus and Terrell Johnson. He remembered them vividly from the dice game, confirming the tension and the threat they represented.
But before the police could act, Marcus faced his true reckoning. At noon, Dorothy Johnson, the grandmother who represented his last moral connection to legitimate life, confronted them.
She knew they hadn't slept. After hearing the news of the arson fire, she asked Marcus directly. His confession was stark and quiet. "Yes, ma'am."
Her grief and fury were immediate.
She stressed that while his father taught him self-respect, he never taught you to be a murderer. You killed children. One of those girls was pregnant. She was forcing him to confront the profound ethical collapse of his father's code.
And Marcus, still clinging to the framework that justified the horror, offered his final desperate rationale to her.
"They took his jacket, Grandma. They laughed about it."
This is where Dorothy delivered the definitive, painful truth that shattered his moral universe.
What did she say? She pointed to the crime scene, visible on the noon news, and said, "That jacket your father left you, it burned in that fire, Marcus. It's ash. Everything you did. It was all for something that doesn't even exist anymore."
She confirmed that the code and the object that symbolized it were obliterated, rendering the entire act meaningless.
Completely.
The arrest occurred less than 16 hours after the fire, at 3:17 p.m. The police were prepared for a violent confrontation.
8 officers approached the apartment, but they found Marcus and Terrell sitting calmly at the kitchen table, unarmed, offering no resistance.
And Marcus, still in that state of cold clarity, offered his last recorded justification to Detective Walsh.
"Because I'm my father's son. He taught me never to let anyone disrespect me."
The neighborhood immediately fractured over this extreme act. It wasn't simple condemnation, There was a genuine schism based on adherence to the code.
The sources detail this division. Some people, like Jerome Washington, a local barber, understood the tragic, hyper-localized logic. He said, "Respect is all you got." Marcus was following the same code every man on these streets follows. He just took it further than most.
So they saw it as an extreme but understandable adherence to an internal law.
Exactly. Others, however, focused entirely on the 11 senseless deaths, condemning the calculated destruction of young people.
The trial began quickly in September 1994, with 43 combined charges of first-degree murder and aggravated arson. The evidence was just damning.
Darnell Hayes' testimony, the chain doors, the receipts for the chains and gasoline, it was overwhelming.
So the defense team, assigned by the public defender's office, attempted a difficult sociological argument.
They did. They posited temporary insanity caused by extreme disrespect and being raised in a war zone environment where failure to respond violently meant death. They brought in sociological experts to testify about the devastating impact of the CHA displacement and the shift toward expressive violence, arguing Marcus was reacting instinctively.
But how did the prosecution counter the argument that Marcus was simply a product of his environment, following its rules?
The prosecution's rebuttal was surgically precise, focusing entirely on the detailed planning. They brought in the physical evidence, the 3 receipts for the chains and padlocks, the gasoline purchases, and the surveillance log Marcus kept.
2 weeks of planning.
Exactly. They argue that 2 weeks of meticulous surveillance, mapping of police response times, and the purchasing of tools explicitly designed to prevent escape absolutely negated any claim of temporary insanity. This was not a sudden burst of rage. It was cold, methodical, premeditated mass murder carried out over 17 days.
And the jury agreed. The verdict came on September 28th, guilty on all counts for both defendants.
And the sentencing reflected the severity of the premeditation. Marcus and Terrell Johnson both received life in prison without possibility of parole.
Marcus remained emotionless, accepting his fate. Terrell broke down crying.
The reality of his future finally hitting him, and Marcus's request to see his grandmother one last time was denied. The code had been honored, but the price was absolute destruction.
Let's track the lingering cost, starting with Marcus, who served 30 years at Menard Correctional Center. Did he ever find peace?
In a strange way, he found a type of internal order. He became quiet and disciplined, working in the prison library, teaching other inmates to read. He imposed a new, self-contained code of conduct.
And his grandmother, Dorothy.
She visited him every month for 18 years until her death in 2012. After learning she passed, Marcus refused food for 3 days and aged visibly, suggesting the only relationship that anchored his morality was now severed.
And his final dying words nearly 30 years later offer the ultimate commentary on the price of that honor.
On March 3, 2024, Marcus died of a heart attack at 57. His last coherent words, delivered to a prison guard, were, "Tell Terrell I'm sorry. Tell him it wasn't worth it."
A final heartbreaking admission that the code he upheld was ultimately empty. Terrell, however, never found that disciplined quietude. He remains incarcerated at Stateville, struggling with the emotional fallout.
Severe depression, PTSD, frequent disciplinary issues. Terrell remains trapped by guilt. In a 2019 interview conducted years before Marcus's death, Terrell admitted, "I ain't got respect. I just got nightmares in a cell I'll die in."
And Janice, his girlfriend,
Moved to Atlanta, married someone else, and built the future he rejected. Terrell is trapped not only by the prison walls, but by the memory of the screaming faces at that 2-inch gap.
and Darnell Hayes, the boy who just wanted to write rap lyrics, the sole survivor, carried the physical and psychological scars for life.
The fall shattered his legs, requiring 6 surgeries and leaving him with chronic pain and a permanent limp, forever dependent on a cane. He never finished high school, never pursued his rap career.
And the survivor's guilt.
Overwhelming. He confessed to interviewers that, "Sometimes I think maybe dying would have been easier." His life remains a constant, painful reminder of the 11 lives that ended that night.
The families of the victims bore unending grief. Keisha Wallace's mother died of a stroke, unable to recover from the loss of her daughter and unborn grandchild. Antoine Mercer's father sold his house and moved away, essentially abandoning the community and the memory of his son.
But the sources also show glimmers of resilience. Jerome Little's mother, whose son was killed the morning he was supposed to interview for a city job, refused to let the tragedy be purely destructive.
She turned his room into a shrine.
And began using his unused interview suit as a prop when teaching at-risk youth about the real, tangible cost of codes that demand blood for disrespect.
And LaShonda Priest's family.
They established a nursing scholarship which has helped 37 young Southside women since 1995 gain the skills that LaShonda was attempting to acquire herself.
Finally, we return to Detective Raymond Walsh, who solved the case but carried the moral complexity with him long after his retirement.
Walsh articulated the core contradiction that defined the case during the trial and afterward. He said, "Technically, Marcus and Terrell Johnson were mass murderers. They committed the act of destruction, but morally, it's far more complicated."
They were following rules they'd been taught since childhood, rules enforced by poverty and abandonment.
The law says one thing, the street says another. That contradiction is something I had to live with every day.
The physical site of the fire, 6743 South Ashland, was demolished in 1995. It's now an empty, unmarked lot.
But the social conditions and the code that emerged from them persist.
This deep dive into the fire of 1994 forces us to hold two conflicting truths in our minds simultaneously. Marcus and Terrell Johnson were calculated, premeditated mass murderers who sealed their victims into a burning building. Yet they were also the logical, tragic product of a system that offered them limited dignity and almost no genuine economic power, forcing them to rely on an internal, self-destructive code of honor.
There is no clean moral resolution to this story. Marcus saved his pride, but he lost his freedom, his future, and ultimately his life decades later, with the confession that it wasn't worth it.
The code was upheld by destroying the self and 11 others.
The debt was paid, but the symbol of the debt, the jacket, burned along with the lives lost, proving that revenge does not heal. It only creates new, self-inflicted wounds that last decades.
The source material challenges us, you the listener, to look beyond the simple label of monster. It asks us to look at the environment that creates the rigidity of that code.
Right.
We see that the inability to show weakness, Ray not returning the jacket, Marcus not allowing the slight to pass, is driven by a profound lack of security, both economic and physical.
So we leave you with the question the source material itself implicitly asks. Where was the true line crossed? At what point did standing up for yourself or what you believed your father taught you become mass murder?
When did honor transform into horror?
We have traced the horrific consequences paid in full. Consider what institutions, what real opportunities, and what a viable community support need to be present in neighborhoods facing systemic abandonment to ensure that personal honor is never again exchanged for such devastating mass violence.
Until next time, we hope you take this detailed knowledge and reflect on the terrible price of codes that demand blood.